Hello and welcome to TechEd 2020. I am very happy you've tuned into my session on design-led development at SAP. My name's Dina and I'm a UX manager for the central design team of SAP. Today, my goal is to help you build better software, build applications that meet the needs of your end users. Because at the end of the day, with business software, most of the time, you're not the actual end user of your application. So key to this approach is that you need to find out exactly who is the user and what is it that this person needs to do their job. First, I'm going to tell you a little more about what's behind the design-led development process. Internally, we shorten it to DLD. I want to explain why we decided to introduce a standardized, unified process to teams in SAP. If you have some background in the design thinking space, you will see there are a lot of those proven methods that we also use in the DLD. Beyond this, it spans the entire development lifecycle. It's simple and easy to follow, and it provides a solid basis for scaling design as a whole. So what are the primary goals we want to achieve with the process? First, we want to bring people and teams together. In an IT or development organization, there are multiple people with different skills. We all know the best output comes from interdisciplinary teams where people collaborate and put their expertise together. One team that follows one approach, which is the DLD. Also, as I said, you're not creating software for yourself or for the fun of it or because you're being paid for it. Well, maybe a little bit of that. There are people that will be using what you've designed and built, possibly every day. They might spend more time with your application than with their partner or children. This is why you should put the end user at the center of your efforts. What you see here is the visualization of the process. We have 4 phases. In phase 1, you discover what you want to do exactly. Here, you try to understand your end users and customers, how they work and what they need. In phase 2, you start designing. You ideate and create initial design prototypes for development and validate with your end users and customers. In phase 3, you develop and do the actual coding. You implement your applications and test with your end users and stakeholders. And finally, in phase 4, your application is delivered to the customers. Work does not end here, but you collect end user, customer, and key stakeholder feedback for driving the next solution iteration. At the end of each of the first 3 phases, we have a checkpoint called Design Gate. Design Gate 0 takes place before the process really gets started. There, we take a look at the customers that have raised demand for this application, then customers that will work with us and provide end users for discussions, the scope, the use case, and persona. We want to make sure that there is a demand we understand and that we are well prepared. Design Gate 1 checks the design for consistency, guideline compliance, and ensures the application has been validated. Design Gate 2 compares the implementation to the design and sees that the qualities verified in Design Gate 1 have not gone lost in the process. The DLD is used in projects all across SAP, but to a different extent. There are multiple criteria that we use to define where on this scale we put the application that we want to build. Is it a big new application or just a minor change to an existing one? How much do we already know about the use case and the user role? What do we still have to find out through research? How often and how intensely will the application be used by its users? How many users will the application really have? Based on the answers, you can then decide how much efforts and time you need to invest in your specific project or application. Consequently, How intensely you follow the design-led development approach. Now, let's go into the details of the process. First, we take a look at the discover phase. Again, the goal of this phase is to understand your end users and customers, how they work and what they need. You will develop a holistic view of the business roles affected by your apps, their typical tasks and pain points, and the sequence of their activities. The first step, of course, we need the team. As I mentioned, it should be interdisciplinary. Here in this case, I listed product design and development, but depending on your setup or organization, you can also add other roles like quality or documentation or then with the newly formed team, you start with a workshop to brainstorm ideas and come up with a very basic scope for your application. Now that you know the scope, you can find the future end users of your application. Go talk to them in person. 3 to 5 end users is typically a good number for this. Understand and research how your end users work, their daily challenges, and what they need to do their job. If possible, I highly advise you meet them at their workplace to really observe live in which environment and under what conditions they work. Bring different disciplines from your team, but make sure you don't overwhelm the end users with too many participants. Once you're back in the office, sit down together and synthesize your findings in a workshop. There are many tools that help you structure all your findings. I personally prefer the definition of a persona. There, out of everything that you've learned, you derive a fictional person that reflects all of your different end users. The persona has a role, has goals, responsibilities, needs, competencies, challenges. You describe their environment and the colleagues that they work with. Once you've agreed on a persona, everybody on the team has the same understanding of the person for whom you're designing the application. Other tools include a business role description, then mapping apps to business roles, end user involvement descriptions, use case diagrams, business process descriptions, but I also like to work with activity flows. By the end of the discover phase, you should know which apps need to be developed and for whom, and you know a lot about the requirements to your application. Consequently, the next step is to get creative and start designing your application. You will ideate a lot and create initial design prototypes. Those designs you can then validate with your end users and customers. Pragmatically, you can just start with some scribbles to quickly and easily visualize first ideas and discuss this very informally in the team. If you are creating an application based on an existing design system, check out the guidelines for that system. At SAP, we are designing based on the SAP Fiori design guidelines. There, you find consistent, proven design concepts that are also available for direct use in our UI technology, SAP UI5. After the scribbles, you can create a first prototype and again, iterate on it as a team. Once more, if you're using SAP Fiori as your design system, you can use the out-of-the-box stencils we provide for our most used prototyping tools, which are Sketch, Axure, and Adobe XD. Then validate your designs with your end users and incorporate the feedback in your prototype. You can do this through usability testing with predefined scripts and tasks. Afterwards, You can also ask questions about how the end users presume the app will work in their regular environment and for their regular tasks. This step is extremely important, as you will see in a second. If now, based on the user feedback, you find out that you have to make changes to your application, you only spent a fraction of the money that such a change will cost later in the process. So in this case, let's say it's $5 to have a number to work with. We have a first validated design. Now we can implement the application in the develop phase and test it with your end users and stakeholders. Of course, during the development phase, you may still need to change some aspects of your design to incorporate ongoing feedback, to optimize the app, to allow for technical constraints. So yes, the design can change. And after some magic, you have your first implementation of the application. If you want to build on the Fiori design system, I highly recommend using the SAP UI5 library of controls, concepts, and layouts to implement your designs. With this, you get out-of-the-box enterprise qualities like consistency or accessibility, performance, and security. If you want to take this even further, we also have a predefined detailed layout available as templates in the SAP Fiori Elements framework. Okay, now you're ready to give the end users another go at your first implementation. Have them test your app hands-on in the system. Observe and see what works and where they struggle. If now, based on the user's feedback, you find out you have to make changes to your application, you spend some more money on the change than after the design phase, because now the efforts have already gone in the product. So it's compared to the design phase, compared to the design phase, it's a lot less than it will cost even later in the process. Based on the previous $5, the same change would now cost you $30. Your application goes out to the customer, but work is not quite done yet. People are now using your application, but how well does it actually work for them? So you need to collect information to improve your application later on. At SAP, we also use tools like Qualtrics to get this kind of data. Go back to your customers, ask your end users for feedback, and observe how well the app functioned in their work environment. If now, based on the user's feedback, you find out you have to make changes to your application, it gets expensive. Costs for the same change as in the previous phases are now 15 times higher than in the design phase. But because you validated so much in the previous phases, the changes are hopefully small. The rest of the feedback you can use for the next release of your application. So to summarize the key aspects of the design-led development process, you want to create solutions with and for your end users. You want to ensure your product will be viable, usable, desirable, and accepted by the users. You want to build awesome applications in one team that uses every member's skills and expertise. There's a small anecdote I can tell you. I was working with a project that started designing this application. They held workshops, came up with a scope, they created mock-ups, they implemented the design, they tried to sell it, but there was no customer because they had missed to take the most essential step, making sure that the app meets the needs of their end users, so no customer felt they had to buy it. In the end, money had gone out the window, and as a manager, what matters to me even more, a team of 10 was very frustrated because they had worked half a year for nothing. If you want to dive deeper into the topic, here are some related sessions and links that you might want to check out. I especially recommend the session on SAP Fiori 3, where you hear more about the Fiori design system that I mentioned a couple of times in my presentation today. There, my colleague Kai will tell you more about how our user experience has evolved to support our customer demand for consistency and integration, and how SAP's UX can help your systems become more intelligent. And then, if you're even more interested, you can take a look at the SAP roadmap session to find out where the newest Fiori 3 when the newest Fiori 3 features will become available to our customers. If you want to look at the details of the DLD or the SAP Fiori design system, the most important link is to the Fiori design guidelines. This is our one single source of truth brought to you by the central design team of SAP. You don't have to memorize the link, you can also Google it. And for even more learning opportunities, you can visit the SAP Learning Hub. There you will have unlimited access to all of our content, always up to date, over 3,000 titles in multiple languages, unlimited access to SAP Learning Rooms, which provide structured and non-structured SAP structure-led social learning and collaboration, where you can get coaching and answers to your questions. Thank you for attending my session. I wish you a successful journey of building your own user-centered application that will make your customers very happy.